Hey everyone, before this episode begins, I wanted to give you a quick primer on what's going to be discussed over the course of this episode. This episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with two game preservationists named Rockman Cosmo and Naoya Shinoda, and they are preserving feature phone games. We explained it in the episode, but what feature phones are basically the predecessor to the smartphone that we see now. They were predominantly in Japan, and think of it like your flip phone, like an old school flip phone, but actually had the ability to play some pretty impressive games. And we go into it in more detail over the course of the episode. But the reason I'm including a primer at the top of the episode is that there are a lot of different terms discussed throughout the episode, and I realized that it wasn't until about an hour in that we made any attempt to explain what they are. So in order to alleviate any possible confusion, I wanted to give you all a little primer about all the different terms that we're going to be talking about when we are in this conversation about feature phones and the games that were on those phones. So, in Japan, at least for the purposes of this conversation, there's probably others that I'm definitely not aware of. There were three major feature phone service providers, similarly how us in the States have, AT&T or Verizon or Comcast or T-Mobile, the different service providers for these flip phones over in Japan. These feature phones, were NTT Docomo, au/KDDI, and SoftBank. So those three, NTT Docomo, au/KDDI, and SoftBank. Now, each one of those had their version of an internet plan for these, or some type of plan for these phones. Similarly to how, like, if we're thinking of internet service providers, Verizon has Fios, Comcast has Xfinity. Well, NTT Docomo, for the purposes of the phone, had a thing called iMode. au/KDDI had a thing called EasyWeb, or had a plan called EasyWeb, and SoftBank had a plan called Yahoo Keitai. I know that some weird names, they don't really fit with what we're used to here in North America, but I wanted to at least explain what they were. So once again, service providers, NTT Docomo, au KDDI, and SoftBank. The plans for each of those, NTT Docomo's service plan for the internet was called iMode. For au/KDDI, theirs was called EasyWeb, and for SoftBank, it was called Yahoo Keitai. Now, there are two different platforms that these phones came in. Platforms, for lack of a better term, think of it like iPhone and Android, how those were the platforms that you could have other phones made with using those platforms, but those were the base of what the phones were programmed with, the operating system or what have you, but they were the platform, they were the root of it. And there's two mentioned. One is called Brew and the other is called JME, which stands for Java Micro Edition. So you have Brew phones, you have JME phones. Later on, there is a specific version of Java remember I mentioned that service provider Docomo, called Doja, which stood for Docomo Java. So it was a version of Java specific to Docomo phones. And it was later changed to a name called Star. Now, I don't understand why all these name changes happened. So to recap everything, three service providers, NTT Docomo, au KDDI, SoftBank. These service providers had their own phone plans or internet plans. iMode for NTT Docomo, EasyWeb for au KDDI, Yahoo Keitai for SoftBank. Of all the different phones, there are two major platforms, and they were Brew and JME, which once again is Java, and some of the delineations of that. So that's it for the primer. That's all I have. I just wanted to quick go over that. Thank you for listening to this episode. This was an amazing conversation that I had, and I really enjoyed it. Hopefully this helps you understand everything as you go along through the episode. And with that said, let's listen to my conversation with Rockman Cosmo and Naoya Shinoda. On this episode of Still Loading, feature phone preservation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, I have two wonderful guests with me, and we are talking about a subject that is definitely under discussed in the gaming community, in the retro gaming and just gaming community at large. As you all know, I'm a big fan of video game history, and I love seeing all the different organizations out there that try to preserve video game history, like the Video Game History Foundation or Hit Save. I think that's another one, right? That's what you guys were featured in, correct?
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's what I thought. So Hit Save is another great organization. And on the show today, I have two people who are actively working towards preserving a very niche but important nonetheless aspect or like area of game history and video games. With me today are Rockman Cosmo and Naoya Shinoda to talk about feature phone preservation. Guys, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
We're doing good. Thank you for having us on.
So just so everyone can get to know each name, Cosmo, could you say hi to everyone and introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Rockman Cosmo, and you can just, as he said, call me Cosmo. I guess to put it simply, I am a mega fan who loves to preserve its history. I lead a few Rockman scanlation projects where I am the typesetter, and I have a wonderful team of translators. And we basically try to take some Japanese exclusive Mega Man materials like guidebooks and comics, and we try to translate them into English so they can be available to a wider audience. And I'm also the leader of the Rockman Feature Phone Preservation Project, which tries to preserve quite a few Rockman feature phone games, and that will be gone to detail later in this episode.
Naoya?
My name is Naoya Shinoda, and I am currently looking into preserving and hunting down information regarding games such as Before Crisis or anything Final Fantasy, iMode, or just anything iMode games, and in terms of their hardware and software, and learning how to preserve it in any way possible.
And listeners, we will go into discussing what iMode is and how that all ties into feature phones. So I have both of you on to talk about feature phone preservation. And like I said at the top of the episode, it is a very niche aspect of video games, specifically because it never really made its way, at least not widely spread outside of Japan. There were a few here that I can think of in North America. Like I remember there was a Ratchet and Clank game that was kind of I don't even know if that would be considered a feature phone game, but there was a Ratchet and Clank game called Going Mobile, which I've never got to play because it was a mobile only game, and I don't even know if that's considered a feature phone. So I think what would be good to start off this episode is just describe what is a feature phone.
Yeah, so I guess when we use the term just for a feature phone, I think we are, as you're saying, describing these types of phones from, I guess, let's see, early 2000s to early 2010s. And it's it's very, very centric inside Japan. And they can take the form of just a typical flip phone, like we know, or some of them are a little more interesting where they have like a front touchscreen and you slide out like the pin underneath, or there's some other more crazy designs, but really it's just what one would consider a dumb phone, just only centric in Japan.
Okay, and the Japan at the time, from my understanding of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, they had a lot more robust online features for their phones than we did in North America, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So what type of features did they have that differed from what, like, obviously we barely had any online functionality on like our flip phones. I know there was a few. I remember on like my friend's flip phone, you could chat through AOL Instant Messenger through text message, and that was about the most advanced it got.
So I guess since we're going to be talking about right now, like the internet features, I guess it's a good time to quickly go through the different platforms, the internet platforms, because that's kind of
that's a good way. So what are the things that make a feature phone? The different. Sorry, I cut you off. The platforms you're talking about.
Yeah, so there are three main platforms that these games and all these services are on. And all of them basically did the exact same thing in which they used the internet to, I guess, enable a bunch of different utilities. So, for example, you could check your bank balance. You had like a fitness app. You could pay your bills. You could watch
Hmm.
movies. You could browse the internet. There, there's even like this pre-installed McDonald's app on some of the phones. So, like, yeah,
To
they
like
got a
order
lot of different.
McDonald's.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, very very
All right.
strange, but probably ordering through your phone, something along those lines. But basically, all of these platforms did the exact same thing, but there were three main ones. So the first and most prominent one is NTT Docomo's iMode, and that
Hmm.
was the first ever, I think, internet service. And that one was basically released in 1999, and that gave everyone functionality to download these things called iApply. And they're basically apps from Docomo, and they gave you all those utilities, sports, banks, etc., but also let you download video games, and that's the most prominent thing to us. And then as a competitor, a company called AU or KDDI released something called EasyWeb, and that allowed users to download Easy Apply, and that's basically the same thing as iApply, just programs. And then finally, there's this company called JPhone, and they made a service called JSky, but then they were bought by Vodafone, and then they called it Vodafone Live, and then finally they were bought out by SoftBank, and it was called Yahoo Keitai. So whenever we refer to
Hmm.
games from this third platform, we mostly just call them SoftBank games. But they had something called S-Apply, and that was just like the other two I've described, apps they can download from SoftBank that give you all this connections to different online functionalities, mostly to help you out, but also video games.
Would it be accurate to kind of describe these different platforms as almost like either, I wouldn't quite say game engines, but would you say they are kind of like how Android and iPhone are now? Just were they like the underlying operating systems for the phones, or were they more specific programs on different phones?
Kind of the, if anything, they all used CLDC, which is what is used in these apps, but then some of the companies added their own little special twist to it. But then eventually they did become kind of like Android and Apple. One had this and the other one had that.
Mm,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, a lot
okay.
of them. Let's see. Yeah, there are two main platforms that these games ran on: JME and Brew. JME stands for Java Micro Edition, and that's basically like the Java software platform, but stripped down to work on cell phones. And that is
Hmm.
essentially the standard for feature phone gaming. So, like the Docomo games, they ran on something called Doja, which is a Docomo Docomo Java platform, and then EasyWeb also used Java for a brief amount of time before switching to Brew, and then SoftBank Games also used JME. But Brew is a little bit different, and like the differences between Brew and JME, I'm a little fuzzy on. So Naya, could you describe what the differences are between those two platforms?
So JME J that's basically a compressed Java, whereas Brew uses C++.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, and in terms of writing it, JME is a little bit simpler. However, it does have some limitations on what you can do, and
Okay.
it kind of is a little bit more. The limitations are more on the JME, but whereas Brew seems to have more limitations on. It's more on the phone, so you can make a very powerful and big-sized Brew app, but it depends on if your device has the memory for it. From what I've seen with the Brew games that are out there.
So I that's interesting. So Brew is almost kind of like it was more powerful. That's interesting. So it's almost like you put a. This is not a perfect comparison, but it's almost like you get the newest Unreal Engine and you make a game, but you're working on a 10-year-old laptop or something like that. Like, I know that's not a perfect comparison, but you can make a game incredibly advanced in the newest Unreal Engine, but it's still limited by your 10-year-old laptop or whatever it is. And that's kind of like what you're talking about with Brew games on the phone.
From what I've seen, yes. As I've tried to develop, Brew apps, and as well as I've also seen what is on Brew and
Mm-hmm.
what game is like on Brew and Java and this, and often at times I do see more that Brew is more powerful. Some will argue that it's about how it's written. Well, true, it is about how it's written, but mainly it's also about what you're using as well, and
Makes
also
sense. Makes sense.
and also the device that you put it on as well.
Now, I think something that would be good to talk about next is why this is so important to preserve. And this actually, I mean, feature phone. The one of the reasons it's important to preserve. It's kind of, I feel like, is almost uh it's prescient, like what you guys are working on now is unfortunately what people, obviously it'll be different tech, are going to have to look to do for games in the future as games go increasingly more digital, because feature phone games were entirely, I mean, I'm assuming they were entirely digital, correct? You didn't have any physical media for these games, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
totally
yeah.
digital.
As physical as you can get is by purchasing a phone with a pre-installed game. That's as physical of a copy release that you can possibly get when it comes to these games.
That's what I thought. Now, listeners, it's important to note that there are actually, I mean, if I'm correct, actually, both of you guys, let me know if I'm correct on this. We actually received a port of a feature phone game, and there might be others that came out here in North America, but the one I'm aware of is for Kingdom Hearts. We had recoded for the Nintendo DS, and those are just ports of feature phone games, correct?
Yes. Recoded is a DS port of the iMode game Kingdom Hearts Coded. There is also actually a video online of original Kingdom Hearts Coded running on a Docomo phone, both a demo version and an actual full version, and the graphics cutscenes are nearly identical and similar to what you see on the DS from what I remember seeing. In terms of the cutscenes, not the gameplay, but the gameplay is very unique and interesting to say the least.
What are some? Now, I think one of the aspects that I feel like listeners should know about here are, this isn't just like feature phone games, because what we were used to in North America, by and large, were games like Snake. Really basic, not necessarily that advanced. Like, it was maybe Solitaire on some of the newer ones, but they were never games that you were like from your favorite franchises or from your favorite game developers. But in Japan, their feature phone games were developed by some of the biggest names, like biggest developers that we know over here. Capcom, obviously, Square Enix. What are some of the games that came out on feature phones that you think would be of interest to people over here in North America, that maybe some from some of the big developers or from some of their favorite franchises, but like games that people should know and kind of lend credence as to why this is so important to preserve?
Rockman, I'll let you go first at that one.
Yeah. This segment's going to be very lengthy because we have a great amount of to talk about. Yeah, so as evidenced by my username, I am a giant Rockman or Mega Man fan. Mega Man's a franchise by Capcom, first came out in 1987, has a bajillion sub-series, and basically Capcom was one of the largest endorsers of feature phone gaming. Like, they had many different other franchises on there, like they had a Monster Hunter game, they had Street Fighter 2 port.
Wow, really?
Yes, Street Fighter 2 was on there as well. So they had a bunch of those other games, but Mega Man was definitely a huge focus. So to start things off, they had ports of existing Mega Man games, so all of the NES Mega Man games from Mega Man 1 to 6, and even Mega Man 9, which came out 2008. So
really,
the
WiiWare title.
Exactly, yeah, the WiiWare title. Yeah, and interestingly, I think the iMode version of Rockman 1 has like an exclusive mode that after you beat the game, you can play through the entire game as Mega Man's sister, Roll.
Huh.
Oh,
And that
really?
mode has never ever appeared ever since. I mean, the closest approximation is Mega Man Powered Up on the PSP, but I think that's a totally unique mode. And then they also got Mega Man X games on there, so Mega Man X 1 through 3, and they also released Mega Man X4 from the PlayStation on a flip phone, two separate versions for the two different characters. Which is it boggles the mind how they're able to do that. I think they're just a bunch of wizards at Capcom that somehow compress a PlayStation game onto a phone. But yeah, so those were the ports that are of interest. But the three main games, I like to call them the big three Rockman feature phone games that my team has luckily secured are Rockman.exe Phantom of Network, Rockman.exe Legend of Network, and Rockman Dash Great Adventure on 5 Islands. So I'll start with the two Rockman.exe games. For the listeners who don't know, Rockman.exe is the Japanese name of Mega Man Battle Network, and that was an action RPG series that was very popular on the Game Boy Advance. Had 6 games, including some Japanese exclusive spin-offs, and it had a pretty popular anime series. I think 2 seasons in the US, and then like 6 seasons total in Japan. And
wow.
it was absolutely huge. And the cool thing is, in the final season of that Battle Network anime, they incorporate aspects of one of the feature phone games in the last season. So I guess they maybe just exhausted all material from the game. So they're like, you know what, let's just throw in a flip phone game. But so Phantom of Network and Legend of Network, they both contain wholly original stories, original characters, like different bosses, different net navies. So Phantom Network was released in 2004 for AU devices, and then later in 2009 for Docomo devices. And Legend of Network was released in 2006 for AU devices, and then again 2009 for Docomo devices. And each game had 8 different chapters that were released on a schedule. So you'd have the first chapter like 1 week, and like maybe like a month later they'd have another chapter. And both unfortunately were delisted in 2018 when Capcom shut down all of their feature phone storefronts. So for Phantom Network, as I said, they had original characters and net navies, or like the computer people who live inside the cyber world. And the AU version actually had an exclusive extra mode called Battler's Tower. And you face 10 opponents in a row with the same like battle chip folder. And the more you win, the higher you go up in rank. So it simulates real-time PvP, but in reality, you just have your scores uploaded to the internet, and then you have to compare it against someone similar. And that Battler's Tower also had a time attack boss mode. And then Legend of Network, that one had another original story featuring some ancient civilization with advanced network technology. It introduces a new mechanic called the Transarm, and I think Mega Man can just, shoot his arm, I think. But that's very, very similar to the double soul mechanic from Battle Network 4 and 5, where you can take the powers of other navies and use them for your own. And since this game was released after the anime concluded, it's actually one of the few pieces of Rockman material that haven't been adapted for that Battle Network anime. So those two Battle Network games, the way they play is actually almost a carbon copy of their Game Boy counterparts.
Interesting.
So the battle system, it's very hard to describe what a battle system looks like, but it's almost like a 3x3 grid that's split. And then you're on one side and enemies on the other side, and you choose the battle chips. Yeah, if you look at gameplay footage of the feature phone Rockman.exe games, it's basically identical. Like, just selecting the chips and using them in real time is totally preserved. The only compromises they had to make were the isometric angle of the cyber world. So from a top-down perspective, and then the overworld is mostly just profile pictures and text boxes, because I don't think the phone has the capability to do a full-fledged overworld where you can walk around in it. So that's pretty much it for the Rockman.exe games. And then the next one I want to touch on is Rockman Dash Great Adventure on 5 Islands. And Rockman Dash is the Japanese name for Mega Man Legends, which is another cult classic from the PlayStation era, and it's basically the only fully 3D Mega Man series. It's very story driven, very, very charming. So if you haven't played I recommend
Isn't it also known for bad voice acting?
I would argue that it's actually the one of the best voice acting in Mega Man games. The other Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8, those
I
ones I
think
think
that's
are
what
the
I'm
great.
thinking of. That must be what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, Dr. Wawi and yeah, and likewise, and the What Am I Fighting For? But yeah, the Mega Man Legends games, I think they had some pretty good voice acting. And I guess I'm going a little tangent here, but interesting fact is in the Japanese version of Mega Man Legends, the two voice actors who voice the two main characters are the same Japanese voice actors who voice the two main characters in Lapida Castle in the Sky.
Oh, the two main characters in Castle in the Sky,
Yeah,
Patsu and Shida.
yeah,
Did I
yeah.
get that? Oh my god, that was I haven't seen that movie in a long time, so that was a pull trying to remember if I got that right. That's crazy though.
Yeah, and the game itself is very inspired from that movie. So it's very cool to have that spiritual connection. So yeah, the Mega Man Legends series has 3 games total. It has 2 mainline games, then a spin-off game, and then they were going to make Mega Man Legends 3 in 2011, but infamously that was canceled, and people still have not recovered from that over 10 years later. But a few people know that Mega Man Legends did receive a midquel between Legends 1 and 2 on feature phones. So Rockman Dash Great Adventure on 5 Islands was only released for Docomo devices in 2008. And it has 5 chapters, one for each island, and it was released on a bi-weekly basis. And basically they got it's a fully 3D game, so it has a 3D combat just like the PlayStation games. They even
Wow.
have like I think if you remember the PlayStation Mega Man Legends games, they had like different textures for the faces to give them that anime sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's still retained in the feature phone version, so the characters will like swap the textures on their faces to convey different crazy emotions.
Mm.
And yeah, so it even has like its own lore that connects to Legends too. But yeah, it's as if you take a Mega Man Legends game from the PlayStation and squash it onto a flip phone. So if you look up gameplay of it, you'll be surprised that it really does look like a very rudimentary PlayStation game, and it runs decently well too. So
I'm always surprised by how much Japanese game devs will lock story elements of a series on very specific platforms. The way you were describing some of these, how like I think what was it, Phantom of Network, where like one version of the game had a different mode. I know it wasn't necessarily story, like I said before, but it had a completely different mode on a different platform, but it was still a feature phone game, right? Was it Phantom of Network?
yeah, Phantom Network. Yeah.
That I never understand like why lock certain things behind certain platforms and not for others. Maybe it could be a technical limitation. I'm not entirely sure, but it always surprises me. And maybe not even just Japanese devs, just game devs in general. But I think of like what Nomura does with the Kingdom Hearts series, where you can't play Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, and 3 and understand the story. You have to go to all the different that's an extreme example, I'm sure, but it just makes me chuckle when it's like it's the same game, just different port has a totally new mode that you would never have seen on the in the other one. But that's a tangent for another day. What are some of the other games that were released for feature phones from major series? I mean, we've talked about Mega Man, we touched on Kingdom Hearts, but are there any other major series that saw feature phone releases, or whether it's a port or original titles?
We're Nalia's category now. He's going to go on a nice tangent because if you thought that the Rockman games had a lot of content, just you wait till you get to Final Fantasy VII. So go ahead,
Oh
Nalia. Final
man.
Fantasy.
All right. The first one I can go into is the one where I've had a lot of experience in, is a game called Before Crisis Final Fantasy VII, where this was one of the many Final Fantasy mobile games that Square Enix released. And this one was a full-fledged real-time action RPG game where you could you play
Wow.
as the Turks from Final Fantasy VII. You get to choose your own Turk, and you're working for Shinra before the event of Final Fantasy VII. And all these Turks, you get to choose their name. You get the different Turks with different weapons, and some have different speed and ability in terms of they can run fast or attack slow, long, mid range.
Mm-hmm.
And the game just offered many things besides from story. It offered things such as being able to create materia just by using the phone's camera and taking a picture. You can send materia to your friends. You can rescue your friends as well when they get captured by avalanche, and
What?
and yeah, and when you rescue them, it's not really it's not an inconvenience. In fact, it's more of an opportunity to earn more rank points, and you can use those rank points to go and buy new characters, new new weapons, new materia. They have a gold saucer event as well, where it's Battle Square,
Wow.
and you can fight other Turks. I'm still researching that subject, and there's also another mode called Weapon Mode, where you fight an exclusive weapon only to Before Crisis, and the weapon's appearance in a city such as Midgar, Castle Decel, or other places actually depends on where the person lives in real time. So if the person lives in Tokyo, it would be Midgar, I think. I'm still fuzzy on the details, but it is online. So finding Jade Weapon would actually depend on where the person is in real time. And
Wow.
and
Okay.
there's still a lot of things about this that is that has not been archived, mainly the footage of the Turks. But it was a but Spirit Enix Space and Nomura and whoever was behind this development basically looked at the phone and said, well, how can we use as much of this phone's capability as possible and actually make it a fun game? And there's a number of devices that can run it, but and there's also other games such as Dirge of Cerberus Lost Episode, which takes place before the events of Dirge of Cerberus, and it is a 3D Final Fantasy VII game where you get to play as Vincent, and it's like a little shooter game, and it's really interesting
Interesting.
playing interesting to play a shooting game on a cell phone. You'd think it wouldn't work, but it actually does work. They actually found a way to make it like bearable. It's not the best way to play, but it's still interesting. It has a story mode. The Western version of the game that actually managed to actually somehow get over here to the United States, it actually did offer voice acting, and
Like
which
the
is
phone
really
version did?
yeah, the phone version actually
Oh,
did offer voice acting.
so we got a
Yeah,
phone Final Fantasy VII game here in North America.
we did. We actually
What?
did have we did actually have Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus Lost Episode for the Verizon phone. We did also end up finding someone who does actually still have the what is called a shell of the game on his phone. However, he we asked him if there's any files remaining on it, and he said that when he attempted to loaded it after he played the game during the time of its release, he wasn't able to download the rest of the files. It had a very short run. It didn't last long for some reason, but I speculate that the iPhone uprising had something to do with this.
Probably.
Also, we do have much evidence. While Before Crisis Final Fantasy VII did not come to North America, it did, however, there is a lot of evidence pointing to that a English Western version does exist. I have uploaded PDF like scans, pamphlets of the game coming over here, as well as we have a video from E3 2006 explaining that one of the people behind Square Enix was saying that the game is going to come to North America, but then 2007 and iPhone happened, so that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And and there's also other things such as Final Fantasies 1, 2, for the after years, Legends, and a few other Final Fantasy games that I am still not able to find yet because the information to what was on iMode can only either be found on the iMode page of that website, which is now gone, but
Mhm.
and also to some archive links thanks to Wayback Machine. And some of them were actually like compared to their Western counterparts, like the Final Fantasy One, the Final Fantasy One game that Docomo released, it's very fast and much better than the J2ME Western version. The Western
Hmm.
version is very slowed down, and you can only do like either only sounds or only music at a time. like one at a
Mm.
time. You can't do anything else. But where the Docomo version of it, I have it on my P900 IV, my Cloud Strife cell phone. It runs like as if you're playing a Super Nintendo, like you're playing the actual version of it, but a more updated
Wow.
one. Yeah, and there's also Final Fantasy IV: The After Years. It has a special map of some kind. I don't know much about that one, but I do have it. I did actually manage to find the Final Fantasy IV: The After Years SoftBank version, which was really surprising too. There's also other games such as, and for Square Enix, they had Dragon Quest, they had Final Fantasy, and I forget there was a third one, but I can't think of it at the moment. There was also Persona Shin Megami Tensei series, and that's another thing
Wow.
to add to this. Most of the games that got released to these phones, they were either an expansion on the story of the franchise, or they were something that offered something either canon or not canon, but still exclusive only to that cell phone game, such as for example, Persona 3's I guess First Mission, I believe that's what it's called,
Okay.
and that actually goes into a story mode of I guess and what it was like before she meets the protagonist in Persona 3, and there's so much more. There's Ace Attorney, that's another Capcom game.
Makes sense. You mentioned before Capcom was a big developer and publisher for this, so that makes sense. They put Ace Attorney. That would fit perfectly for a feature phone, like that style of gameplay.
What doesn't fit, in my opinion, is the Street Fighter game. There is a Street Fighter Doja game, and I thought to myself, I've played enough Street Fighter to know that this will not work on a phone, but I'll give it a chance. And I do have it, and I was like, it's okay, but it's pretty decent for Capcom to be heading into that direction. There's also
It has a dedicated Hadouken button, so I mean, what more can you ask for?
that's
think
just
it's
all the
I
skill.
think it's
You
the
just
number
Hadouken
9.
your way to victory.
Yeah, I think all you do is just spam the number 9, and you're gonna win.
and there's also and there's many other games: Professor Layton, Monster Hunter, Katamari, Devil May Cry, Super Monkey Ball, Sonic, Kingdom Hearts, Initial D, Metal Gear. And that's barely scratching
I
the
believe it.
surface of what was on there. Finding information on these games or finding footage of these games as of now is really hard. The best place to look for is either Nico Video, or just reaching out to someone in Japan on Twitter who might somehow possibly still have the game.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
Run it.
wild.
That is.
yeah, yeah. It's crazy because a lot of these feature phone version of these games, like he had just skimmed over a few, like the Katamari game, there was a version of it on the P904i, which was I think that was 2007, and with that one, it actually comes with tilt controls. So what happens is it uses this technology called Gesture Tech iMobile, and the phone detects vibration via the camera. And when you rotate the phone,
Whoa.
he actually rolls the ball. And Naoya gave me a phone with the game on it, and I can attest this thing is really accurate somehow with the
Wow.
camera. Like I even tried like doing it in a dark room, it still somehow finds the vibration, and it's basically like it looks like you copy paste Katamari from the console to the phone just on a phone screen. Like it's still 3D, it still has the sound effects, even has the Katamari theme happily playing in the background. But yeah, so yeah, the Katamari games on the phone using the camera for tilt is crazy. And then I was talking about Super Monkey Ball. I think that also used some similar technology.
I do.
And then,
I do want to throw in something there really quickly. The phones that could run Doja and Star, while Doja and Star might have been difficult to code for some people. However, the hardware, from what I've seen and what I've heard, that runs these games, they seem to be far more advanced than what the Western J2ME phones were running. There's maybe a small percentage, or maybe a few J2ME phones that could run some intense game, but that's only a few. Whereas Docomo and Doja and Star phones, there was a lot of like phones that could run these games with like no little to no problem. Some problem, but basically the hardware was more advanced than Western. Anyway, go ahead, Rockman. Cosmos.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything you said, yeah, was totally correct. Some of the phones do struggle a little bit. Like the Sonic 2 port I have, it like runs at like 10 frames a second.
Oof.
But for example, I have this Gundam game on my
Oh yes.
well, I have them on two phones now. Which phone is this? This is the P07A, and basically what happens with this is I wish I could show what it looks like in front of me, but instead of opening the flip phone up regularly, if you close it and hold the side of it, you can open up the screen horizontally and hold it like a little mini laptop with the screen sideways.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like the Professor Layton games use this horizontal functionality, and the Gundam game that I'm referring to also uses this functionality. So it's like a 3D shooter, except it runs at like 30 frames a second. Like it's super smooth, and you can do like melee combat, and you're just kind of skating around your giant robot, and you're hitting other giant robots. And the version I have has online functionality where you could play against other people, but of course, it doesn't work anymore. But
Yeah.
yeah, so some of these phones definitely had these kind of cool features, and I guess there was a Metal Gear game for Brew.
Yeah.
Um, I think like I've seen an advertisement for one of the Metal Gear games, and they advertised one of the cell phones. Like the cell phone that Snake uses in it is the exact same model of the phone that's exists in real life. Kind of like Crisis Core. Actually, that's going to come out later this week. But the phone that Zach has in that game is a real phone that Naya referred to, the P900 IV,
Okay.
and it's also the same phone that Cloud uses in Advent Children movie.
For the Metal Gear Solid game, that comes pre-installed on a W53S phone.
That's
Yeah,
so crazy. I mean, it's
I
just it's wild what they were able to do with like, because I think we're just so used to, at least from a North American perspective, it's just so we didn't get anything like this. Like our phones, I feel like we're so limited by comparison. Um, I do want to ask before we continue on, just because we've been going for a little bit talking about like what feature phones are and what type of games were available for them. I want to know more about both of you guys though. Like, how did you first get into feature phone preservation? Like, was it something that you discovered and ended up having a passion for, or was it like, did you actually get to play any American versions or North American versions of feature phone games? I don't know who wants to go first, but how did you guys get into this?
If you don't mind me, Cosmos, I'd like to go first.
Go
sounds
for it.
good. Yeah, go ahead.
So what started with me was before Crisis Final Fantasy VII. I've known about the game ever since I saw the trailer on the Advent Children DVD. It took me a while to understand that, oh, this is a cell phone game, but I didn't really understand that there was a whole other world out there. And then over the years, I tried keeping up and seeing if Before Crisis was playable, but nothing ever happened. So then I get to 2020, yeah, the end of 2020, and then I stumble upon this forum started by Shidemp, who back in 2016 16, around that time, he tried helping search for Before Crisis Final Fantasy VII, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when more people came in, started searching, looking, whatever, and they were trying to find the game, and their goal was to make it playable, be on their own, because to this day and during then there was no legal possible way to play the game
Yeah.
or at all. Like no, there was no way to purchase it. Like no way was given to us, and so I looked into it and I bought my own like Cloud Stripe cell phone because I love the design and I love what it was. And then eventually over time I bought more of the phones because I thought to myself, oh well, eventually the game's going to be on it, and it's like, no, it's not.
It's just never.
And then
Yeah.
yeah, and then eventually I got all these ideas of wanting to put games on it, my own games on it. And then eventually over time I just found out, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. And then I was finding out little by little, more and more, that there were these really powerful, really amazing and good games on these phones, but yet for some reason nobody was just making an effort to, or at least no one in Japan was making an effort to save these games. But then I also eventually found the Coffee Break Discord with a bunch of people who are dedicated to hunting down, finding information on these games as much as they can possibly do. And so eventually I just started saying to myself, well, okay, well, I'll start helping looking into it. I'll do some dirty work because, who else is going to help us? Because the companies were kind of showing that, like, for example, Square Enix kind of showed that there seemed to be little to no care at all for games like Before Crisis and Dirge of Cerberus and the other ones. For the Final Fantasy 1 and 2 ports of iMode, understandable. We already got kind of that on iPhone, but the games like Before Crisis, it was 2000. It shut down in 2018. It was 2020, and I'm just looking around and I just see no signs at all of them wanting to put Before Crisis on, to modern consoles. Even though I know that it would do well.
Mm-hmm.
That's when eventually, over time, I just realized to myself, someone's got to put some effort into this, and if no one starts, then no one's eventually going to pick it up later.
Mm-hmm.
And so slowly, little by little, every day, ever since the beginning of 2021, I started hunting down these games, hunting down these phones, finding out what is and isn't possible, and slowly trying to make what isn't possible to become it is possible. Trying to. It'll take some time, but we'll get there eventually.
All right, Cosmo, what about you? How did you get into this?
Yeah, so for many years, as I said before, I'm a big Mega Man fan. So yeah, I've played a bunch of Mega Man games, and these feature phone games have always been kind of in the back of my head, like, oh, Battle Network. Oh, well, it looks like they had some on a flip phone. Okay, that's kind of interesting. But I never really seriously considered like jumping into the game and trying to help save them until, let's see, I got involved with the Rockman community seriously, I think in July 2020. And that's when I started my Rockman Dash Grand Venture Guide scanlation project. And basically we took a Japanese Rockman Dash guidebook and translated the whole 100 plus pages plus the developer scribbles into English. It took us 2 years, and we actually finished I think this July. So yeah, it took a very, very long time. But as I started that project, I started to become more and more interested in helping preserve more Rockman history, because for my entire life, ever since I was a kid, I've always found like preserving history to just be something fascinating. Like there are these things from our past, and like if someone doesn't do anything about it, it's going to be lost. And I've always deeply respected those, whether it be Egyptian history or video game history, whatever it be. I've always really respected those types of people. So as I started doing this book project and I got deeper into it, I was just thinking about other ways that I could try helping save history. So like I started another scanlation project trying to translate this Taiwanese Rockman Dash comic into English. So I'm on my merry way doing both of these projects, typesetting, getting stuff from translators. And then one day in December of 2020, this guy named Proto Dude, who's kind of like the figurehead of the Mega Man community in the US, he puts out this call on Twitter saying, look, like there's this phone that might have a Mega Man game on it, and it's a brew phone, and reach out to me for more details. So I reach out to him, and he tells me about something called EasyWeb. So I do a bunch of research on EasyWeb documentation, and I show it to him, and Proto Dude's impressed, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to put you into our very, very small group. We only had like 3 people at that point. I'm going to put you into this group, and, we think we found a phone that has the Rockman.exe games on it. And it turns out that it was not actually a Brew phone, it was a Docomo phone. And the phone actually had both Rockman.exe games with all the chapters on there, which was incredible. And yeah, so ever since December 2020, we were able to get possession of the phone. The phone's now currently in one of our correspondents in New York. It's inside a safe. So
wow,
nothing bad will ever happen to it. It's too valuable. But yeah, ever since 2020, we've been working towards doing it. I was initially just in like a regular team member role, but Proto Dude himself is very, very busy doing other Rockman preservation stuff. So over time, I just started to become the de facto leader and now I guess everyone looks up to me as the leader of the team. So yeah, we've made great progress ever since then, and probably later on this podcast I'll talk more about what goes into preserving it. But yeah, that's really what happened. Just starting with Mega Man preservation through Japanese only books, and then just happened to be one day I just saw a call to action, and just I did some research, and here I am now, deep in the hole of feature phone preservation. Never gonna get out of it.
Oh, I do also want to say is that in terms of the price, like how much you have to pay for these games, all these games, they're not like 30 to 40, $60 like, today's games. All they are is in order to get access to play them, all you got to do is you just pay a monthly subscription as low as $2 to $5 to get
Wow.
access to the games. And yeah, Rockman probably knows, Cosmos knows more about the pricing for the Rockman games. But in terms of a game like Before Crisis, you just pay $5 a month and you get to play Before Crisis for like the entire month. So I just wanted to throw that in there as how cheap these games were. But
That's how they were distributed back when they were contemporary, like, or when they
yeah,
were new, I should say.
yeah, I
Okay.
thought I'd throw this out there because that's pretty cool in my opinion. Pay monthly to play these games for the cell phones. I thought it was a
No,
decent way to pay for
that's
them.
important to know because it's context, especially with preservation and history, is important. You need context to understand why certain things were the way they are. It's like it. I mean, it's. I don't know. I was trying to find an example off the top of my head, but I can't think of one right now. But context is extremely important. I mean, you could think about it in almost any historical study, whether it's about video games or otherwise. Context is insanely, and so knowing how it was distributed and for what price is definitely is incredibly important. I The next question I want to ask, though, and it was actually kind of perfect, Cosmo. You referenced it a little bit before. I wanted to talk about the act of preservation itself for these. Like, what goes into preserving these games? What are some of the challenges that you experience when preserving these games?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if it's okay for you, can I go over like
Yeah.
what goes on in the
Oh yeah.
Rockman project?
Oh yeah. Go for it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the cool thing about the Rockman project, when I talk about this stuff, is we're kind of in two different camps, two different problems that we're having with preserving these types of games. And the EXE games are on one side, and Five Islands is on the other side. So I'll start with the EXE games. So basically, what they're on right now, they're directly on the phone themselves, but basically we have to find a way to get into the phone's file system to find where these Java files are located. And that's easier said than done because the architecture of these phones, like, it's not like a single console, for example, like the NES. Like, we've got hundreds upon hundreds of different flip phone models, which means
Hmm.
that, like let's say we crack one flip phone model, well, can't apply it to the other one, right? So our phone, luckily, we were able to find its schematics on the FCC website. So that definitely helped us in trying to get inside the phone itself. And right now, our plan of action is to try to dump the phone's NAND chip, analyze that chip to, I guess, reverse engineer the firmware, then dump it, and then analyze the file system to find where all of these files are. So
Wow.
currently, we've ran into some trouble with analyzing the phone's NAND chip because, I don't know, I think something's up with the programmer or maybe even the chip itself. But we were able to find the bootloader, and one of our team members is currently analyzing the bootloader to see what we can get from that. And I think I'm pretty hopeful that we can find some stuff inside that bootloader that can help us get inside that phone itself. So yeah, the one method of doing it is trying to hack these phones directly, and this goes without being said, but like that does require some very, very, very technical knowledge. Like if you ask me
Yeah.
to do it myself, like no way I could do that. We have this one team member named Craze who's like a technical mastermind, and he really handles a lot of this technical things like that, like soldering, desoldering the chip. He even tried taking it to a Ukrainian state lab. He lives in Kiev, so before the war and everything, he tried taking it to a state forensics lab to try to get the phone
Wow.
analyzed, but they didn't. They weren't able to, probably just because it's not high on their priorities list. But
Yeah.
But yeah, but Craze himself though, small side. I mean, he's an absolute beast because, as I said, he lives in Kiev, and I was actually talking to him right as the war in Ukraine started, and he had to be moved to a bomb shelter because it's so dangerous. In the early months of the war, he actually left his bomb shelter to go back to his house to save our project's test phones and supplies.
Wow.
Yeah, and
That's
he continued working.
dedication.
Yeah, and he continued working and helping the feature phone community from his bomb shelter. Like if you look at the pictures of his phones that he's taking, like that's he's obviously in a not in a well lit area, but he continued to continue to
That's
help us.
I I I'm like half flabbergasted and like amazed at that dedication and like not actually angry but like slightly angry because I'm like you there's a war going on. You don't need to do this. Like like holy shit. That's amazing. Like that's amazing. Like genuinely. I'm not when I said I'm mad, I'm not mad like genuinely mad. I'm just like in shock. Like that's insane. That's so wow. I don't I literally I'm legitimately speechless. Like that's so much dedication to a project. That's amazing.
Yeah. We can't appreciate him enough. And like I mentioned them on the previous podcast, and they told me, look, I mean, I appreciate you saying that, but it was a less than 50% chance that I was going to get hit with the bomb. And I was like, yeah, but that's a non-zero chance. And he's just like,
Well, what's the chance for us to get hit with a bomb over here in North America? Significantly less than that.
significantly less. Yeah, but he's an incredibly humble person and guy. But I'm just very thankful to have him on the team. So
Mhm.
that was the directly hacking the phone aspects. That's one aspect that we could do. And then the other side is Five Islands, where, oh yes, I should probably mention for the Rockman EXE games, it actually has its original owner's SIM card in there, which means that the
Okay.
games are playable. And that's another thing that we can probably touch on later. But basically, with paid games with these feature phones, you must have the original SIM card with it. Otherwise, it cannot be
Oh.
run. However, that does not apply to demos. The demos for the games, I'll talk about it later, but that has slightly different stipulations. But long story short, if you do want to play a game that's been paid, you do have to have that kind of SIM card. Because with Five Islands, the owner, she used to live in Japan, and then she bought the game over there, and then she gave her SIM card back to Docomo when she moved back to the States. So, so she was one of my translators for the Rockman Dash Great Adventure Guide project, and she claimed that she had just lost the phone with Five Islands on there. But I told her, can you just look one more time? And a few months later, she got back to me and said, "Oh yeah, I went to my old residence, and here it is." So the phone itself has all five islands of the game on an SD card. So some of these phones have
Wow.
micro SD capabilities, and the problem is that you could think, oh, just take the micro SD out, put it into a computer, and then just bam, you have the files right there. Unfortunately, there's something called encryption, and that is another giant problem because the SD cards have a C-tier cryptomeria cipher that basically locks any kind of files on there behind a layer of encryption. And that's another problem that really faces a lot of games now. Like, for example, the Game Preservation Society last year downloaded like 800 games off the iMode store before it shut down. But all of those games are on SD cards and therefore encrypted. So, like over the summer, I think last year, I contacted some professors who authored a study on cracking this type of cipher. And basically, what you need the encryption keys, you need the data itself, and then you need something called a substitution box or an S box. And our current scenario back then was all we have is the data, but we don't have the S box or the keys, right? And then I told the professor, and the professor told me, you know what? Unfortunately, it is mathematically impossible to crack the code. Like it's gonna be like after the heat death of the universe that we could crack, the encryption on there.
Wow.
So that was kind of a bummer. Didn't feel good. But luckily, one team member named Bincat, he was able to find the C2 S box somehow. I don't know exactly how he was able to find it, but also he was also able to show us how to do a more complete dump of the micro SD card with all the protected partitions. So from there,
Okay.
we were able to get some more keys. And now the final key that we have to get to stop the encryption is inside the phone's firmware. So now we have to find a way to dump this phone's firmware, and then from inside there we can get that one last key and hopefully crack this layer of encryption. Fingers crossed there's nothing underneath it. I will throw something out the window if it does, but yeah, so basically that's the gist with a lot of these phones on SD cards, where you just got to find a way to crack the cipher. Now that we have the S box, it's a bit easier, but as I said, it's all model by model. So just because we found the keys for our P06C phone, it's not going to work for like an SH10C, for example.
Are there any security measures that come in where it's like if you try to like hack the phone or crack, you know what, like any of the things that you're trying to do in order to make these games playable again, will it like delete all the files on the phone? Are there any security measures that kind of like throw a wrench into these plans?
Hmm.
Oh, go ahead now. Yeah. I don't believe there are any, but maybe he might know.
Try to think here. As far as I know, it's just mainly the encryption that is the
Okay.
problem. Because so far, we've had like what was it? We had someone who was able to dump a multiple number of AU phones, and half of them we were able to like dump the firmware and get the file system and actually get some games, demos, but still like actual games we've never got over in overseas. But then there are some where we dump them, and for some reason, even though we use the same method to dump the other phones with the same chips and whatnot, there's just
Yeah.
something in the phone that's written that says
Hmm.
the best I can do is half, and you're not able. And sadly, we ran into this problem when trying to dump the phone with Before Crisis Final Fantasy VII. I have the demo. I'm looking into different ways to hack the phone, which is sad because this is like one of the few this is so far the only Final Fantasy VII game that fans still have not played yet. The original one, a fan version exists, but the original version brings something unique to the experience. It brings that you've never played it before type thing. Also, it's a Final
Yeah.
Fantasy VII game on a cell phone of all things.
I mean,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Sorry. Go on. Go on.
and that was kind of it for the AU phones. For the Docomo phones, no one. I mean, a few people have been able to dump some of the overseas Docomo phones, the Western version Docomo phones. There are some phones that had like this bizarre Doja version, and some people have been,
Mhm.
and some of them we've been able to get into, some not. SoftBank, on the other hand, no one's attempted because they have the most obscure, weirdest niche. No one's ever heard of these type CPUs, or
Interesting.
data sheets. Yeah, they're very bizarre. SoftBank's the weirdest one of all. Like I just have to throw this little out there. So some of these phones do have Wi-Fi. Now you can't download apps on Wi-Fi, and generally the logic is
What?
if a phone has Wi-Fi, you should be able to use the Wi-Fi. But
Yeah.
apparently SoftBank has one of their phones, the 945SH, that does have Wi-Fi in it, and if you try to go to the Wi-Fi feature, it says you need to connect to 3G to use the Wi-Fi. And I'm not kidding. I literally just said, Lockbank, listen here. We got some problems here. I don't think you understand what Wi-Fi really
Wi-Fi
is.
means.
Yeah, I mean, at least with Docomo and AU, they're a little bit free. They're like, oh yeah, you can connect to this network and download whatnot. But SoftBank if you want to run the games, you have to connect to 3G. Like you have to be connected to 3G to run them. It makes no sense.
That's just what.
Oh
I'm sorry.
yeah.
I just can't get over the idea that you need 3G to be able to connect via Wi-Fi. I'm like, that defeats the purpose of Wi-Fi entirely. That's just.
It's
Oh
some
my
weird
god,
little
that's funny.
permission nonsense that some of the Japanese developers, they got a little too strict. They get a little too strict with these phones. Even with the Android flip phones they have now, there's still some restrictions on them that make you say, "Really? Do you really have to be this strict?" But it is what it is with Japan, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Japan has always been very. I mean, you look at how Nintendo handles piracy stuff. Like
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons they, this is a mild tangent, but like Nintendo has always had a weird penchant for like trying to stop piracy at all costs. Like with the N64, they stayed with cartridges because it was harder to pirate. With the GameCube, they did the mini DVDs because they were also harder to pirate. The DS was hard to pirate for until people figured out how to download the ROMs into like one of those freaking cartridges that you can store them all on. But like Nintendo's, I feel like I guess I shouldn't say Nintendo speaks for all of Japanese developers, but it is kind of indicative of like what you would see. Because even like back in what is it? I'm thinking this was a North American exclusive game, but Star Tropics, where they had that the only way you could proceed farther in the game is by getting a code that was found in the manual. So that was like another method of piracy protection and stuff like that.
Well, that's interesting. I've never heard of that before.
Oh yeah, there's what's fun about like older games before like DRM and other stuff is that they would find unique ways of copyright protection, and that was like one of them. This wasn't a Japanese developer, but Secret of Monkey Island, LucasArts. There was like a Dial a Pirate thing, which was like a little spin wheel that you would go around, and it was their version of copyright protection where they would give you like a pirate name up on the screen and you'd have to rotate the thing and get the right answer type of thing. Obviously now you can literally, it was the copyright protection that they used for like Star Tropics would not work at all today because they used the same number across all copies. So you just go onto the internet, look up what that code is, and the game's yours. You can complete the rest of the game regardless of it. But obviously that was, it came out in like the 80s, but pre-internet was being accessible to everybody. So that wasn't really as much of an issue back then. But anyway, that's a tangent. This is fascinating though. So what other aspects of preservation are there to discuss with this for feature phone games? Is there anything else you guys would like to go into?
I would say, what do you think, Cosmos, in terms of like side loading, or just basically development of these games, and like if actually better, what would happen if you actually got the game? What can you do with the reward?
Oh yeah. So I guess now's a good time to go into demos. So
yeah.
Demos.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are probably some people that are listening right now. They're like, dang, what they're talking about is really cool, and like how can I play these games for myself, basically? And
sell that pitch.
Oh man! All right, now I got to pitch this now. I'm on what, Shark Tank or something. So I guess the best way to find these kinds of games and play them are finding phones that have certain games pre-installed on them, because currently with the iMode website shutting down last November, and actually that's something that we can go into after this, but basically there's no way now to purchase these games and I guess play them brand new ever, basically, because EasyWeb and SoftBank's service, they all shut down way before. And iMode itself as a service, like its games portion shut down last year, but the iMode service itself shuts down in 2026. So
oh wow,
it's kind of crazy how it's still going to this day, 1999 all the way to 2026. Like, you gotta give them props for that.
I will say that in theory, even though the iMode official website is down, you can still download your own iApply if you wanted to, if you do have an iMode contract. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But signing up for new subscriptions in Japan has been closed, so that's that.
Yeah, it's been closed since like 2018. So yeah, so basically, if you want to play like a paid game, like let's say I want to play Five Islands, for example, or recommended EXE games. Unfortunately, I don't have a silver bullet for that. The way we got these games mostly came down to luck. Like we just had one willing Japanese person who would give the EXE phones to us, and I just happened to know a translator who had that with her. Like what Naoya has been doing, like Before Crisis they've been searching it for a long time, and the crazy thing is Before Crisis has like 28 different chapters, right? And
wow.
And guess what? Each new chapter, as it's installed, it auto deletes older chapters because it can't all fit.
Whoa.
So basically, you can't find a device that has all the chapters on it hypothetically because it just doesn't fit.
And and I'll throw this in there. To be fair, and this isn't Square Enix trying to be very anti-preservation. And this is mainly due to the limitation of the Java files that Docomo has. They had it set to 100 kilobytes a jar file, so that's the max. But you can download 10 separate jar files and then program it to tell which jar file to go here and there and everything. So basically, in a way, you're streaming these games with Dirge of Cerberus and Rockman Dash, I believe. You can actually store them on the SD card.
Okay.
Yeah, so all of them fit.
Yeah, so there's a way, but not all companies did it. But most of the games out there, they did actually implement this feature, but not all of them.
Yeah, so then let's see. So that's paid games, but preloaded games, that's the one that are most accessible. So I guess let's see. So I guess I'll go through all these types of games here. So Docomo pre-installed games, the ones that came from iMode, those actually require no SIM card to play the game. So for example, I can take out my what is it? Let's just say I can take out my P903i and I can boot up the Dirge of Cerberus Lost Episode demo, and it doesn't ask me for any kind of SIM card authentication on like a paid game.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, AU is a little more complicated because AU used to have Java games, but then like a few years after they launched it, they switched to Brew. So when we say Brew games, like it's pretty much all AU phones. So AU Java pre-installed games, they also don't require a SIM card to open the game. However, AU Brew pre-installed games actually require the original SIM card in order to play the demo, which is why it's so hard to find the Final Fantasy VII Before Crisis demo. Because basically, when you try to get a phone with the demo on it, you got to have that SIM card on there.
Sorry, real quick before you continue, what is the difference between an AU phone? Like, is AU a brand, or is it like what exactly is an AU phone?
It's similar to Verizon, T-Mobile, just another phone company.
So it's like a service provider.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you got the three main ones. Yeah, Docomo, AU, and
Okay. I was nodding my head for a little bit, like I know what you're talking about, but I'm glad I understood. Okay, so Docomo, AU, those are the service providers. Okay, I got you now.
Yeah. Thanks for asking for clarification, because I'm sure that occasionally we deal with this stuff so often that we might forget to clarify some terms that we're using. Yeah, so the Brew AU pre-installed games require that original SIM card. And then if you want to get a SoftBank pre-installed demo, good luck, because they required 3G service to start any game, and the demos can't be played without the SIM card. So basically, that's kind of a bygone conclusion. Yeah. So let's say I want to find a phone that has these games on there. I recommend you go to Bai, and that's a proxy for other Japanese shopping sites. And I recommend you look on Mercari and Yahoo Auctions, because a lot of these sellers, they sell the phone on there for relatively cheap prices because they're treated as junk nowadays thanks to the smartphones. And basically, you buy the phone off of there and you just pray that the pre-installed games are not deleted. So unfortunately, there is an aspect of luck. So far, I've actually been quite lucky. Only one of my phones has had no games on there. The other ones have just been have been reset, but like the pre-installed apps are still on the phone themselves. But there is an aspect of luck. So if there is like one like type of phone that I recommend buying, it's definitely a Docomo phone, because you're not going to have that luck, will it have the SIM card or not kind of a thing. Because with the Docomo phones, you just got to get the phone model you like, and each phone model has different pre-installed games. So actually recently I made a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet, it has like every single Docomo iMode phone in existence, and it has every single preloaded game. So you can look at that and say, for example, I want to play the Katamari game. Well, you can just Control F Katamari, and you'll see which models have Katamari pre-installed. Or if I want to play Dirge of Cerberus, it'll show you those ones. Or Kingdom Hearts Coded was only on one phone, I think, and that one is also. And then you can just go to Bai or Mercari and look up, P07A, and then you can look up all the listings, and and then use the buyer's judgment from there. Like, is this something a good product? Is it good quality, etc. But I think that's the like if you want to play these games for yourself, that's the best way. Unfortunately, there is luck involved, but we have to take what we can get.
Is there any chances that they're like, I mean, I would assume it'd have to be a game dev or someone who knows who understands especially coding for that type of phone, to like be able to port these games over to like either an emulator of some sort? Is there any like or maybe a way to develop an emulator to handle this type of stuff, or the workarounds for the SIM card, like maybe program the game to be like, work, I know this is an oversimplified explanation, but like this game only works with SIM card ID number 12345, and everyone has that, and the emulator just, that's its SIM card ID or something like that. Like, is that even a possibility, or is it just something unknown yet?
So with Docomo's Doja and Star Games, at the current moment of this of
This
right now,
recording.
yeah, this recording, there is no emulator that supports it. One's being developed by by a developer named Zur, who is working on adding iApply support to the emulator Scroll JME.
Mm-hmm.
J2ME Loader does support AU Java games, which are in the KJX format, however, only to a certain resolution. And they do also actually support, as far as I've seen, a good number of SoftBank games, which wasn't really intended by the developer, but that's because SoftBank games generally just use the same API that Western phones do, just with some special ones here and there. As for Brew, there is one emulator out there, Melange, and I believe that it is the only Brew emulator out there. It doesn't support audio yet, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if the developer will get to adding sound. Uh, Emulator development is hard, but Docomo does have documentation on its iApply and everything. So, and a lot of the iApply is based off of what Western J2ME games are. So I think it's possible. It's just it'll take some people some time to, figure it out, because from what I've shared with some people, they look at it and go like, "Oh, what's the? I don't want to touch that," and that's what they say to me.
Real quick, J2ME, that's the basically the North American standard for like phones, like the behind the scenes stuff of like old flip phones and stuff like that.
Yeah, kind of. Technically, if I'm correct, from the Doja, from what I was reading in the Doja 5.1, is that you you could use the same stuff that you use in J2ME to make your iApply or your Doja game
Mm-hmm.
as well. You
Okay.
could, yeah. It's just they have extensions and options and stuff like that. It gets more and more complicated as you go deeper and deeper into that little iceberg.
No, it makes sense. I cut you off though a little bit beforehand. Was there something you wanted to finish up saying? I just had that question because most of my listeners, including myself, I mean, this is a lot of this is new information for us. Hence why I was asking, like, what's J2ME? What's oh my gosh, I'm already forgetting the three standard network carriers, but the ones that you mentioned before, and like operating system, all that other stuff. Like, if I ask any questions, like cut you off for that, that's why. It's because all of these are new terms to all of us.
No, that's okay. I admire the passion.
But I think what we should wrap up our conversation before we go into plugs is just why this is important. Why preserving these games are important. Now, listeners, you know that I find video game history extremely important. I mean, games as a medium have existed now for over 50 years, but like, and that's still a very young medium compared to even film, which is much older than games and obviously the other types of media. But like, game preservation is extremely important because this has affected culture. It's extremely important. So I think it's good to kind of end this episode in discussing why preserving feature phone games is important. And one thing I wanted to say this, and before I let you guys kind of go off on, like, because you're the expert, so I want to end it with why you guys feel this is important, because I agree with you, but you will have a much better insight as to why it's important more than me. But I wanted to say it is amazing what you both are doing, because it's kind of tragic to think that the people who are doing the most for video game preservation are not the companies that created the product. And that's just a heartbreaking thought. Like, Frank Cifaldi of the Video Game History Foundation has it, like, semi tongue-in-cheek, semi seriously, says steal from your companies, because that's the only way people are able to preserve some elements from these games. Like, unless some Square or Capcom employees stole stuff from Square or Capcom, I mean, you guys are doing the Lord's work and trying to do it this way, but imagine how much easier it would be if you had like an inside developer. You know what I mean? But the fact that you don't, it just shows like game companies don't do this. So it's the fans that have to take up this mantle that they really arguably never should have, because the company should have been preserving it. So it's really amazing what you both are doing. And I just wanted to say that before I let you kind of dive in and talk about why it's important to preserve this aspect of game history.
Yeah. So, Naya, if it's okay if I go first.
Yeah, go for it. I'll go after you.
Yeah. So I think just preserving, I think preserving feature phones is so important, as you said, because they are an indelible cornerstone of video game history. I think they're the precursors to modern mobile gaming. Like, a lot of the aspects
100%.
that are in there, like from like what he was talking about, the gold saucer content in Before Crisis, and talking to friends, and like friends sending you some material Before Crisis, or like the simulated PvP mode where you're comparing scores. That's very similar to these early online modes in regular mobile games. And I think the reason why it's so overlooked and ignored is just because it was so central to Japan, and it was so stuck over there. Like, the Japanese had this term in retrospect. Probably gonna butcher it. It's like garake, and that basically means Galapagos phone. And then it's called Galapagos because, just like the creatures of the Galapagos Islands, they only survived on that island, and they can't really survive anywhere else. Just like Japanese cell phone culture, it couldn't survive anywhere else. So I think that's just a key reason why it's so important, and also just because a lot of these developers of these companies and these franchises, they all had such strangely significant outings on these cell phones. Before Crisis, I think, is the most ambitious flip phone game I've ever seen in my life. I think just the amount of things they packed into that was absolutely incredible. Just the stories of these games, and how important they are to the franchises and overall history of video games, I think, is just what makes them so incredible. And I think that if there's one thing that we all need, that the feature phone preservation community needs right now, is just more technical support and more people to spread the word about this.
Yes.
Like, just like what we're doing on the podcast right here, like, this is exactly what I've been trying to do for a long time, because unfortunately, due to how niche this is, it has been overlooked by larger gaming preservation organizations. And I just think that as time goes on, it's a bit of a time-sensitive crisis. Now, this is not to say that this is better than any other sector of preservation. I think that this is all, very important. But like the hardware of these phones, they were not meant to last 2 decades. And a lot of them are pushing 2 decades old right now. And I'm afraid that once the hardware is gone, the games will be gone. And I just think that at the very end of this, when we plug our stuff, I'm going to plug some resources that people can turn into. So, like, if anyone's listening right now who thinks they could jump in and maybe help us out with this, I'll link some resources at the very end. But yeah, I think just what I said before is why it's so important. It's just another story, and as the Video Game History Foundation says on their website, all stories are going to be remembered, and this is definitely one of those stories that is more significant than people might think. Go ahead, Naya.
I would say it's what makes it important to preserve these games is to to kind of make a stance and show that regardless of what platform a game is developed on, it should not be discarded, thrown away. These games, they have the same graphics as what, like, during the time of Pong and Zelda and Mario, and yet those games get treated like glory games, whereas I there's just in my book no opinion or no reason as to why these games should not be saved. I'm sure there's a bunch of other people out there who would love to enjoy these games, and to tell someone who would want to play this game, to tell them you're not allowed to play the game because you weren't born in this country and you weren't born at this time and you didn't have the information at the time, that just doesn't seem fair to me at all. And I know the world says this, and that's just how it is. Well, I don't believe in that. These games are fun, they're unique, they're good little time passers, and and I'll tell you this, they will give you a unique experience that the games today will not be able to give you. But then again, that's all games.
I mean, even games back then wouldn't be able to give you, because it was specifically Japan. We never got an experience like this really in North America. The closest I think honestly, the closest I've seen to something like this is what the Playdate is doing now, where they have like waves of new games that get installed on the system via Wi-Fi, through the internet. And that just came out like late last year, and it's an indie console. It's like this little tiny. Have you guys heard of the Playdate before?
Yeah.
I have not played it.
The Playdate's pretty awesome. It's like the visuals of it are considered 1-bit. It's just black and white. Like there's not even shades of gray. It's just black and white, and it's got a little hand crank on the side. It's a tiny little handheld. It's really adorable, and it's got these really unique games for it. But you download games in waves. Like there's different like waves of games that'll come out on a monthly basis type of thing, and it kind of reminds me of the episodic nature of these feature phone games.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's I want to get my hands on one myself, but I just can't justify the money for it because it's like $200 for it or something like that. So it is a very niche hobby type of thing, but it's done pretty well from what I can see. It looks really cool. But what I was going to say was I don't know. I do think just because this is like people talk about Pong and other stuff, not because of the the graphics are worse, but because they were notable. They were the start of the infancy of the game industry. But like with this, the reason why I feel like people just let it go, and they shouldn't, mind you, that is just because a lot of game preservation efforts, at least from the North American perspective, feels to be very North American focused, like from that viewpoint. Like I'm sure there's more coming from Europe now, but like a lot of it feels like we're going to preserve North America's viewpoint of Nintendo and North America's viewpoint of Sega, when there is so much more out there. Like from, especially like if you're talking about Sega, like just as a quick example, like Sega in Brazil and Europe is a way different story than Sega in North America. And likewise, phone gaming in Japan is a way different story than phone gaming as we know it in North America. So at the core level, even if you do not like these games, this is important work because it's giving context of a part of the medium that we never really got to experience here in North America. Additionally, now you mentioned that it kind of predated the current phone culture. I would even argue it predates just modern gaming culture or gaming business practices, because everything is digital and it's very easy for games to just get lost. Like how many games on like even the iPhone store are delisted that you'll never see again unless someone installed it on their phone and they still have that phone and it's still installed.
Also, I will say that the iOS apps, if you did purchase it on your if you did purchase it once before, it is still technically on your purchase list. It's just you won't be able to download it unless you have a 32-bit device. Just throwing that out there. So
Okay,
if
so
you
that
did
is
purchase
still an
it,
option.
you there is a way. And also I do want to say is that that if you don't like take a stand and start preserving these games, it may seem like, oh well, it's not going to have any consequences in the future. Well, it'll have a bigger. I guarantee that if we don't make an effort to show that we care about these games, they eventually companies will have a mindset of, oh, we should throw them away. Kind of like when Sony said they were going to shut down all their PlayStation games, and then like on a PlayStation store, and then the fans backlashed and said, no, you're not going to do that. And then they said, okay, we're not going to do that. So companies will listen if more and large amount of people chime in. But anyone could chime in and just be kind and generous and tell a company how you feel. Just do be kind and generous about it. That's all I gotta say.
No, you're right, and like as time goes on, probably the audience for the people who are going to care about those services is going to dwindle. The people who care about the Vita and PS3 services are going to dwindle over time. And additionally, I did read a Twitter thread a while ago about one of the reasons why it's so expensive for companies to keep servers up isn't necessarily the cost of keeping the server running. It's just keeping the ability to purchase and all the different purchase things on the from the servers, from the network, as well as it's also difficult to keep up with whatever the current standards, like legally, like what type of protections, like digital protections they need to have installed, like for the customers and stuff like that. I don't know how true. I don't know it for a fact. I read that on a Twitter thread from someone that I kind of trust, but that was also a while ago. But even with all that, the companies are only going to do something if it makes them money. This preservation in general doesn't always make them money. So that's why, like you said, we have to care about this, because companies aren't. Another prime example, Square Enix, when they did the HD remasters of Kingdom Hearts, they threw out the source code for the original Kingdom Hearts. So they had to build it from the ground up again for the PS3, because they got rid of the original version, when it would have been significantly easier if they had just kept it.
They did the same thing with Final Fantasy VII's Advent Children files as well, the source files. So
that's wild.
That's what I heard. I can be wrong about that, but I've been hearing a lot of people saying that that's true. It kind of makes me a little bit worried for Before Crisis, but
I know, right?
It is what it is.
I mean, hey, you do what you can, but I think this is a good place to leave off. I think this is a good place to end the episode. We can go into plugs. Now, I do want to say, before you guys give all your plugs, this episode will be coming out, just so you have because we are recording this pretty far in advance. This episode will be coming out Sunday, January 8th. And it'll be released for patrons on Wednesday, January 4th. So if there's anything you would like to promote that would be out in time for that, I don't know if anything or not, but I always like to give the specific date, so that way, if there is something coming out between now and then, you can talk about it.
Yeah, now I think about it, I'm not sure I have anything coming out before then. But I just like to say my plug. So you can find me on Twitter at Rockman Cosmo. That's just Rockman and then COSMO. I also have a website that has updates on my other projects, but also has other contact information like my email, and that's rockmancosmo.weebly.com. And then if you do want resources on how to help save help save Vidrophone gaming history, you can reach out to either one of us. I'd love to answer more questions about this. There's also the most centralized community that I know of is a place that Naya had referred to called Coffee Break, and that's KHVIBREAK, and that is like a nice little community of very technically minded people, and yeah, they basically need all the help they need because they're very, very small. And yeah, so if anyone knows some technical stuff, just feel free to drop in that Discord server, and these people would love to have some more help. So yeah, that's the number one place I recommend you to go and I guess talk to other people about this subject. And if you just don't have that technical experience, you still want to get the word out about feature phone gaming, just tell your friends if they're gamers. Talk about it online, because the more that people talk about this, the more that the companies will see it, the more that other preservation organizations will see it, and yeah, hopefully this will, result in good things. So yeah, Naya, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to say that I am a big believer that in if you do make it let known to companies and spread the word, it'll be like a way to confirm to companies saying, yeah, we should do this. For me, I'm on Twitter, same name, Naoya Shinoda, NaoyaShinota. I'm also on Reddit and in the Coffee Break Discord. And if you ever have any questions about anything feature phone related, you can go ahead and message and ask me. And if you if you think for a second that the question you have is a stupid question, not believe me. There's no stupid questions. I enjoy the newbie questions because I like to help people more, and I don't believe that this information should be locked up. I like to spread it and share it as much as humanly possible that I can with the limitations that we have on this world.
All right. Well, thank you both for being on the show. Before I give my plugs, one final segment that I want to do. Whenever I interview people, I have on. I ask my wife to provide me a question, and my wife, famously to the listeners of the show, is not a gamer, is not into any of the nerdy and geeky things that I'm into, anime, video games, nothing like that. So I always ask her to provide me questions for my guests, even though she has no idea what they do. So for this segment, for questions from Courtney, questions from Courtney, she would like to know Christmas lights. Do you prefer white lights or the Christmas lights that have a lot of different colors? What is your
Different
stance
colors.
on this? Different colors?
Yeah.
that was fast. I'm the same as Naya. Yeah, I like the different colors. Just like I kind of appreciate all the white lights, but just at a time, it's just so bright and overwhelming. I think just having different colors mixes things up a bit.
All right, there we go. Courtney, if you listen to this, you're going to be upset because she likes just the plain white lights. I know. I married one. But no. All right, that will do it for this episode of Still Loading. For myself, my own plugs, as usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Still Loading Pod on all of them. If you want to support the show, you can give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find the show. It helps please the algorithm gods, and hopefully people will find their way to this podcast. If you want to support the show monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod for $1 a month. You'll get the episodes a few days early at a better bit rate, as well as access to a patron exclusive Discord. For $4 a month, you'll get everything at the $1 tier, plus 2 bonus mini episodes every month. For $5 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned before, plus access to the monthly exclusive podcast Still Bonding, which is a monthly show where my friend Eric and I bond over 007 by watching all of the James Bond movies and usually talking about them for 2.5 to 3 hours. They are long episodes and they are wonderfully fun to record. So I hope if you're interested in that, please consider going to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. At the time this episode releases, Thunderball will have been the most recent one, and for You Only Live Twice will be on its way out shortly. So, and of course, the most important shout out, the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that will do it for this episode of Still Loading. Cosmo, Naoya, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And I will see you all next time.